Horror and fantasy films have often been dismissed as exploitation, as if exploiting a film was something shameful. Far from it being a sin, exploitation is essential. The audience has to know about it. They have to want to see it. That involves key elements that are often missing in films of today. Gimmicks, advertising, ballyhoo. In a word, showmanship.
Early filmmakers exploited colour as early as 1894. Artists painted each frame to approximate real colours. To audiences of the day, it was remarkable.
The Lost World, like most silent movies, as I understand it, even though they were shot in black and white, weren't really black and white films per se. They were always tinted, not in the sense of colorizing as we do today, but they were tinted to give various moods. In fact, in the case of The Lost World, the fire scenes at the end when the volcano was going off were all tinted red. The scenes at night were tinted blue. I think the scenes in the museum might have been kind of an amber color or a yellowish color. And this was done all the time in silent movies.
The silent Phantom of the Opera used an early Technicolor for certain sequences, the effect magnified by the preceding half hour in monochrome. Early Technicolor was sensitized for red-orange and blue-green, effecting a pastel image. Nevertheless, it made films different. Warner Brothers, which had pioneered sound with The Jazz Singer in 1927, promoted Technicolor with two early chillers, Dr. X and Mystery of the Wax Museum. But color film required 10 times as much light, making sets insufferably hot.
Another one! It is my theory that one of us in the past, through dire necessity, was driven to cannibalism. The memory of that act was hammered like a nail into the mind of that man. Shrewd and brilliant, he could conceal his madness from the human eye, even from himself. But he can't conceal it from the eyes of the radio sensitivity.
In 1933, Technicolor introduced a new process using all three primary colors. Advertising featured the name prominently. By 1939, large-budget color productions were the major studio's prime attractions.
Supposedly, one reel of film was shot in color, a test reel from Son of Frankenstein. The original intent was to shoot this film in color, and I think the makeups and the costumes and the sets were designed for color, except then they went ahead and they shot it in black and white.
Studios reserved color for premiere presentations. For a remake of Phantom of the Opera, Hal Moore's cinematography received an Oscar.
There was a process called Cinecolor that a lot of them, well, I won't even say a lot because I can't even think of that many examples. Invaders from Mars is the only one that comes to mind, but it was a cheaper color process. I think it only used like 2 colors. But the problem with it was, besides that, if you're not using the 3 base colors, you're getting kind of a funny look. I understand there was something about the emulsion that you couldn't quite get a focus that was real crystal clear either. But you could say your film was in color that way, and it was legitimate.
Glad to see they can at least restore color, because I always liked that one. I've got a TV print, and the color is getting worse and worse and worse.
There you are, my friends, another unique little pet. Fin-backed Lizzie. Cute. I was right. We're going to see things on this island that no other human being has ever seen. Look, darling, it's here. They're real. Probably many others.
I never doubted you for a moment, Ted.
Shall we go on, or do you two want to stay here and tell each other how wonderful you are?
Unreal hues enhanced sci-fi nightmares like this, with striking visuals devised by William Cameron Menzies, designer of Gone with the Wind.
Nobody can locate anything, anybody. The Martians, we've got to start them.
In 1956, at this studio, Hammer Films decided to make a cheap black and white remake of Frankenstein. James Carreras, chairman of Hammer, and producer Anthony Hines understood the value of giving the audience what it wanted to see, and Warner Brothers needed a film to compete with television, which was all black and white at the time. The result was The Curse of Frankenstein.
This is not Lucy, the sister you loved. It's only a shell, possessed and corrupted by the evil of Dracula.
Well, Horror of Dracula was a particularly big moment in my life and the life of a lot of kids my age. We had watched the Universal pictures, and they were scary, but they were on television in your house. So there was something about that was a little safer about watching those pictures. But in a theater with color and just the general trappings that the Hammer films had, I mean, they were very impressive.
Critics condemned it for its emphasis on red blood. But in fact, Jack Asher's photography concentrated on neutral colors with dashes of green or blue. Color eventually became commonplace. But in the 1950s, it was still a major expense.
The only competition at the time was the AIP pictures, really, and they had very low production values. At the time that a lot of these low-budget pictures were being made in the 50s, most of them couldn't afford color, because I believe at that time color stock was like, to process it and all, was like 3 times the cost of black and white. And so these pictures naturally were in black and white. But they would like to give the illusion that they were in color, so they would like film the last minute of the picture in color.
Look at the giant!
The power of this colossal beast threatens a war of brutality, such as we've never known.
Oh, no, Glenn, no!
I remember in Return of Dracula, there's a scene where they drive this stake through this vampire's heart, and it cuts to a close-up of, you know, a bed sheet or something, and blood spurts out.
I have a great honor to bestow upon you. I intend to add you two to my collection.
You want real heads on your wall?
As real as I can get them.
See the Master Monster Maker's Chamber of Horrors in color.
You'll see the monsters in flaming color, it would say, you know, and yeah, you would for a minute or something, and that would be it. But you know, you got suckered again, and they got your quarter, and what are you going to do about it, kid?
Sam Arkoff and Jim Nicholson of AIP invited me to lunch. We made all our deals over lunch, and asked me to make 2 $100,000 black and white horror films. And I said, and I think I was right, and they had finally agreed with me. I said, we've played this game a lot of times. I think the audience is going to get tired of always seeing 2 low-budget films. Why don't I make 1 3-week picture for $200,000 in color, and let's try it as a single bill? And they asked me what I would like to do, and I said The Fall of the House of Usher by Poe.
Here they all are. Ushers.
This is monstrous.
It waits for me, because very soon I shall be dead.
Oh, Madeline, come away with me now. You buried your own sister alive? I did. But she's dead now.
The master hand of the macabre creates its masterpiece.
By the 1970s, black and white actually became a novelty gimmick.
Young Frankenstein, personally directed by Mel Blazing Saddles Brooks, in black and white. No offense.
The startling potential of three-dimensional photography has existed parallel with motion pictures. It was only natural that the process would be exploited in fantasy films. Oh, you did bring your red and green 3D glasses, didn't you?
Without red and green lenses, it is nearly impossible to watch. With them, some people see 3D images, others simply get a headache. 3D thus remained sporadic and experimental until the early 1950s. The first major studio 3D film starred Vincent Price in a remake of Warner's Mystery of the Wax Museum.
Done that, my dear.
It is, Kathy.
It's one of the great Hollywood stories, is that it was when they wanted a director for it, they hired a man with one eye who couldn't see 3D at all. Andre de Toth was a very good director, but he really was the wrong director for 3D because he couldn't see. And he'd go to the rushes and he'd say, well, what are they doing? Why is everybody so excited about this? You know, well, it didn't mean anything to him. But he made a good picture. He made essentially a very good thriller. And the tricks were just happened. I mean, there weren't a lot of them. Later on, they threw everything at everybody.
Columbia Pictures cashed in on the success of the Price film.
It was a different idea. He killed people, but then he made himself up to look like the people that he'd killed. That's right. Which was really kind of fun. And two of the people that I killed and made myself up to look like were great friends of mine. But it was fun to do, and terrible makeup jobs, again, 5 o'clock every morning. It was a good script.
Well, why don't you laugh now?
You know, 3D was then and now nothing but a gimmick, and it's awful. And the only ones who'd done it was some guy who'd done the House of Wax and a few other creepy things with it.
I saw it once in 3D. It was very good. And then later on, they showed it on television many years later in 3D, and you had to wear the glasses on. It didn't turn out too good on TV.
Warner's followed with a story very roughly based on Edgar Allan Poe. The ludicrous low-budget films soured the public taste for 3D. The three-dimension craze was over. Many films shot in 3D, like Alfred Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder, were released flat.
Hello? Hello?
The process briefly resurfaced in this 1961 psychological thriller.
Put the mask on now. Put the mask on now.
A few films exploited the theory of subliminal messages based on a rumor that flash frames of popcorn subconsciously made an audience hungry. As you see, subliminal flashes do have an effect. They are annoying.
Well, I think there are two major changes in horror films and fantasy films in the post-war period. One is, particularly in the early 50s, the need to compete with television, and therefore a search for other kinds of technology, and that meant widescreen and 3D and variations on the theme. There was another major change too, which was, of course, the fear related to the splitting of the atom.
In 1956, a rumor circulated in America about a certain British chiller.
Any movie that dealt with the fantastic, okay, it all automatically got a, I forgave anything, right? Any single thing that went wrong with it, I was a great fan of the Quatermass Experiment, and in this country it's called The Creeping Unknown. By the time, it was 1956, I believe, it came around to my little town in Kentucky, a 13-year-old boy had died of heart failure during watching the movie in some other town, like Baltimore. And the word had gotten out. My father was very upset. You cannot go to see this film. Well, somehow I ended up seeing it, and it absolutely terrified me. Maybe it was because I kept thinking, my heart rate stopped. Oh, God.
Well, it never happened. But then neither distributor nor the production company, Hammer Films, went out of their way to deny it.
Producer William Castle elaborated on the death by fright concept.
During every suspenseful moment of the running of the motion picture macabre, the life of everyone in this theater will be insured by Lloyd's of London for $1,000 against death by fright.
It was a legitimate policy, and it got people into the theater, because there it was on the poster, you know, insured death by fright, which of course, you know, I don't think there's any picture ever made that would actually kill somebody, least of all macabre.
Castle began his career as a teenage theatrical stage manager. For revival of Bela Lugosi in Dracula, Castle had a nurse in attendance at each performance, a gag that dated back to the original production of Dracula in the theater in 1927.
Bill really was, I read an article just the other day. I was on an airline going to Florida, and the article in the airline magazine was Whatever Happened to Showbiz. And it was an article about Bill Castle. And this is only, you know, Bill's been dead a long time. And it was about the gimmicks that he pulled. Emergo, which was in the House on Haunted Hill.
What that was it was a skeleton concealed beside the screen in a box, and at the point in the film where the skeleton comes out of this vat of acid, this thing comes wheezing and squeaking across the wires, and you know, the kids throwing popcorn boxes at it and trying to shoot it down, which they often did, and I'm sure it was a theater manager's nightmare.
And the Tingler, which he wired the seats with little buzzers. He had a great sense of showmanship, and I must say he was fun to work with. He was a good director. He wasn't a great movie director, but he knew how to put this kind of film together.
Scream for your lives! The Tingler is loose in this theater!
Other producers outdid even William Castle's wild promotions.
This is a witch deflector. The next time you come to this theater, it could save your life.
Guys and gals, remember, disguise yourself from the forces of evil. Get your Rasputin beard free as you enter the theater.
The zenith of giveaway gimmicks was the 1970 film Mark of the Devil. Audience members are given a gag bag.
Jim Nicholson, the president of American International, had the idea of adding this 13-minute prologue where this supposed reputable hypnotherapist, or whatever he was, Dr. Emil Frankl, or I can't remember his name, talks about the power of hypnosis, and somehow this is supposed to actually make you experience everything that's happening in the picture. Of course it didn't. It was just another carnival kind of a stunt to get people in, and it was funny.
My name is Emil Franchel, and I am a psychologist specializing in hypnotism. You are about to see a preview of the most fantastic advance ever to be made in the history of motion picture entertainment, called Hypnovista. It is a psychological technique whereby you, seated in the auditorium, actually become part of the action you see on the screen. Well, let me show you something. You will feel absolutely no pain at all. How do you feel?
Fine, thank you.
Well, thank you, young lady. We'll get back to removing the needles in just a few moments.
If you really want to scare someone, tell them this. You're probably not going to believe this story. I wouldn't blame you. If someone told it to me, I wouldn't believe it either. But I know it's true because it happened to me. And at that point, you can tell them anything.
This so-called factual film was a send-up of mild-mannered maniac Ed Gein, a Wisconsin necrophile and cannibal who inspired Robert Bloch's original novel, Psycho.
The most bizarre and brutal series of crimes in America.
The fine art of exploitation has become a bit more sophisticated over the last century. Instead of hand-drawn posters, we have music video tie-ins. Instead of a nurse in the lobby, we have a television blitzkrieg of advertisements.
One of the latest gimmicks is on videotapes. They have unrated versions. It's like you're really going to see something steamy, and all you're going to see is, you know, like another 4 minutes of the same sex scene that you wished weren't in the picture in the first place. But anyway, it's another gimmick.
That's as nonsensical in its own way as vibrating theatre seats. It's merely a way to make you pay twice to see the same movie.
It's called Ballyhoo, and it's as old as show business. In the 19th century, P.T. Barnum ran his American Museum in New York, featuring all manner of dwarfs, pinheads, giants, fat ladies, bearded men, and skeleton women. Patrons would see signs posted that read, "This way to the egress." What was an egress? Some sort of exotic animal? A human oddity? They didn't know until they went through the door and found themselves on the street. Egress means exit, and they had to pay to get back in.